Hello, this is Rob Woods and welcome to episode 14 of the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. This is the show for anyone who works in fundraising and who wants ideas for how to raise more money, really enjoy their job and make a bigger difference. If you're a fundraiser or the chief executive of a charity and you already work with a board of volunteer fundraisers, or you've heard about this tactic and would like to make it work for your organisation, but you have some reservations about the practicalities and the risks that it brings, then today's episode should serve to demystify and hopefully inspire you. Because today I'm sharing advice from one of the world's experts on how to work with volunteer boards to boost major donor, trust and corporate income by working with a board of senior volunteers. I'm particularly excited to bring you this content from inside the resource library in our Bright Spot Members Club, and which our members have told me they found really helpful over the years. It's part of an interview I did with a smart, experienced, high-value fundraiser called Jennifer Coleman-Peers. If you don't know Jennifer, here's a brief snapshot. She's worked for charities for more than 16 years, and for 9 of those she worked for the NSPCC, a large children's charity in the UK. She did a variety of roles there. In fact, she joined as a graduate trainee, and for 4 years she was the head of Volunteer Board Fundraising, responsible for a team of fundraisers raising £2 to £3 million per year. She was also, for several years, the chair of the Institute of Fundraising's Volunteer Board Fundraising Special Interest Group. This session with Jennifer includes some research into why working with a volunteer board helps you raise more money than if you tried to do high-value fundraising without one. The 4 things you need in place as a charity if you're to go ahead with this approach, and practical advice about how to find and work with an effective chair and board members. I made this interview with Jennifer several years ago, and since then she's come back into the club to answer members' questions. And each time we've worked with Jennifer, her calm, clear-thinking, evidence-based approach has proved hugely helpful to myself and the members of the Bright Spot Club.
This episode of the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast is brought to you by the Bright Spot Members Club. As a practical alternative to one-off conferences and courses whose impact can fade all too quickly, the Members Club is an online resource that gives you ongoing access to a whole library of video training courses, monthly coaching webinars and live training events. It's all designed to help you learn, enjoy your job and raise more money. To join the 300 fundraisers already in the club, or just to find out more, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk.
On the day of the interview, I went to meet Jennifer in the offices of the Institute of Imagination, a new museum for which Jennifer was the head of philanthropy, a role which included managing a board of volunteer fundraisers. At the time of publishing this episode, Jennifer splits her week between the museum and her independent work as a social impact consultant. The first question I asked Jennifer was about how she weighs up the pros and cons of working with senior volunteers in high-value fundraising.
There are certainly days of working with volunteer boards where you think, why is this worth it, when you're having a particularly frustrating situation. But absolutely, I'm a huge advocate for working with volunteers. I think actually in any capacity, we're talking about fundraising today, but I think whatever you're trying to achieve can only be enhanced by having a broader group of people pushing in the same direction. From a fundraising perspective, I think you can access more networks, you can deliver more fundraising and ultimately raise more money for your charity working with volunteers than you could possibly do on your own. Volunteer boards that we're talking about are senior volunteers, so those people who have incredible influence. They're captains of industry, they're entrepreneurs, they're running big trusts and foundations. These are the people that hold the keys to all sorts of different fundraising opportunities. And if you can inspire them and engage them and get them working in the right way for your organisation, and that's obviously the challenge, then I think they can achieve incredible things. So just to give a couple of examples. One is the art auction, which is an event that we held for the NSPCC, and it was actually the start of a whole range of art-based fundraising that led to further fundraising events later on. But it was driven by an artist, so Keith Tyson, who very well-known contemporary artist, was really inspired by our work and joined our campaign board. And because of his connections, because of his reputation, he was able to engage other artists and importantly other buyers of art, collectors of art, to put together this incredible collection of contemporary pieces from people like Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin, which were auctioned at Sotheby's. And again, using his connections, he got them to waive their buyer's fee, waive their commission. So all the profits came to the NSPCC. And that event raised £1.5 million.
Wow.
And that's something that we wouldn't have even dreamed possible if we were trying to do that as staff members. I couldn't possibly have just called Damien Hirst up and said, would you give me a piece that will sell for over £1 million?
Yeah. And the key thing is, the listener may be thinking, well, I just, in my organisation, I wouldn't have access to some of those connections. That may be true, but the principle remains the same, does it not?
Yes.
The principle is that however large or small or well-connected your organisation is or isn't, the principle remains the same, that if you go to people in your community who are relatively well-connected, they will be able to deliver value and contacts for you that you, the staff member, can't. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think, thinking about it on the simplest level, peer-to-peer fundraising will always be more successful than staff to donor fundraising. And if you think about that in your own situation, if your friend were to send you an email asking for sponsorship for a marathon they were running for X charity, how much more likely are you to sponsor your friend than if you got an email out of the blue from the charity itself asking you for a donation? Yeah. Of course, you're going to, you're much more likely to sponsor your friend than you are to just respond to a cold mail. And that's exactly the same. The same principle applies. A friend asking a friend at whatever level, in whatever network, or a business contact is always going to be more successful than a cold approach from somebody. And particularly, I think, when you're dealing with more senior people, there's always the sort of hierarchy, the perception of somebody, a fundraiser from a charity is not going to be perceived at the same level as a CEO of a company, or a famous artist or whatever it might be. So I think right from, teenagers fundraising from each other, or, running fundraising events through to, the most senior people in society, the same principle applies.
And I believe that there was one thumbnail bit of research you conducted about major gift asks at the NSPCC.
Yeah, so we were trying to sort of answer that question of what added value is there from volunteers. Because they're not always easy, so making sure that we were absolutely able to justify it. And we looked at a pool of major gifts. There at the NSPCC there was a team of people, still is a team of people working to secure major gifts directly as staff, and then we were fundraising through volunteers to secure major gifts. From the sample that we took, we were 4 times more likely to secure a major gift where it was asked for by a peer than when it was asked for by a staff member. So not only do you get the huge kind of increase in prospects and your prospect pool, so just from having a connection, they bring new names, but at the point of asking, if a peer member is involved in that ask, they were 4 times more likely to be successful. So
almost always when the volunteer was involved, the ask resulted in a yes, and these were, if my memory serves me correctly, £100,000 gifts or something like that?
So anything from 10,000 up.
10,000 to 100,000 in that pool sample. Just the staff member making the ask, the chances were not necessarily in your favour. Mm-hmm. Involve a senior person who knew that donor, almost always it ended in a yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So our appetite is whetted that absolutely, if we're a fundraiser who wants to make maximum value for our organisation, we really need to consider this one. But it's not all plain sailing, and probably you've learned the hard way, as have I, that there's some things you need to get right. If I'm in an organisation and I'm thinking maybe this volunteer board strategy would really lift, especially our philanthropic income, what are some things that I should consider before I rush into this as and actually going to set up a board?
Mm-hmm. I think there are 4 things that you really should think about and make sure that you have in place, because if you set up a board without these, I think you've got an uphill struggle. It's always going to be difficult. But I think if you have these 4 things in place, then you'll be much more likely to be successful. The first is, can you clearly articulate the mission and purpose of your organisation? What is it you're trying to achieve as a charity? Do you have a solid case for support? Is that compelling? Have you tested that with major donors? Have you tested that with volunteers? And that obviously applies to any kind of fundraising, but it's surprising the number of organisations that don't have that clear articulation. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, can you then apply that to what you're specifically asking your volunteers to achieve? So if you're, at the NSPCC, the mission is to end cruelty to children. There's a clearly articulated case for support for the organisation, but that's a very broad mission. What is it that the volunteers are trying to achieve? For example, one of the boards that I was responsible for at the NSPCC was raising money for therapeutic services. So they had a very clear mission that they understood the context within which they were working, that it was overall they were helping to end cruelty, but their specific responsibility, the thing that they could really make a difference on, was therapeutic services, making sure that they were provided to the thousands of children that needed them each year. And we were able to tie specific financial targets to that, and they could see of the money they were raising, what that was contributing to that specific goal. So the first two kind of go together. Can you articulate the mission and vision of the organisation, and can you then make that tangible and real for the volunteers? Can they make a difference to that? I think the second two are more cultural. So do you have senior buy-in to working with a volunteer board? So the people that you're trying to engage are the most senior people. They're chief executives, as I said, they're captains of industry. And you obviously, as a fundraiser, need to have your fantastic influencing skills. You need to build rapport and engagement with these people. But you won't be able to avoid them wanting to speak to your chief exec, to the person who's running your services, to the people making decisions in your organisation. And time again, I've spoken to fundraisers who have had an idea for setting up a board. Their chief exec and fundraising director have said, "Oh yeah, sounds like a great idea. You go off and do that." That just won't work. You can't have the fundraiser just merrily working with the volunteer boards at the side. They won't have that. They will expect to speak to people at their level, whether that's the chief exec or the finance director. So you really need to make sure that senior team have understood that has a time requirement. They will be expected to come to events. They'll be expected to come to key meetings. And that is essentially the kind of price that they will have to pay in order to get the returns from the board. They will also have to face questions and challenges. So again, these people will have opinions. If you've sold them well on the mission and you've given them a clear remit in terms of fundraising, they're going to have a say about that. So do they think you're running your services efficiently? Do they have an opinion about a better supplier they think you should use? They're going to have suggestions, and your senior team need to be willing to handle those questions, handle those objections sensitively, and not shut them down and not shut them out, because that will be a huge block to you. No matter how much relationship building wizardry you use, you won't be able to keep on going if that's the case.
Yeah. So it's let's be clear. We're not saying that the charity is necessarily going to have to take all this advice and go away and change its strategy. But we are, and most of the time, probably let's hope it was using the most sensible supplier and so on. But you are saying they might need to be prepared for the fact that these questions will come, and above all, that they need to be able to handle them in a sensitive way and a diplomatic way that takes on board the good intent of the volunteer, but doesn't put their nose out of joint for expressing an opinion.
Absolutely. So again, they're going to have to deploy their relationship building skills and the time that goes into doing that. And then the fourth thing, which again sort of kind of comes from that really, is then the buy-in and support of your fundraising colleagues. So obviously it depends on the structure that you have in your fundraising team, but the likelihood is that there will be colleagues within your fundraising team who are responsible for other areas. So you might have a corporate fundraising colleague or a community fundraising colleague, and if you are using your volunteer board to its fullest extent, they will be making a difference to all areas of your fundraising. So they might have a connection to a company they want you to engage. You're going to be able to need to work with your corporate colleague to develop that relationship, to work to get the most out of your volunteer. So again, it's no good if your fundraising colleagues are saying, "Oh yes, that's great, you do your board, but I don't want to engage with them." They are also going to have to give up time. And again, use their relationship building skills to manage questions or suggestions that come from the volunteers. So again, you need that buy-in, and if the culture kind of flows from the top. So if you need your senior team to buy in, and then they need to model that to their the teams below them, so that your fundraising colleagues will also support you in delivering from your board.
Yeah. So if right now the listener is thinking, well, I've got some of these four in place, but I have some concerns about some of them. It's not the end of the world. It's just they might need to do some really serious effort of influencing internally, either to improve the case for sport or to really do whatever they can to help the senior team or their colleagues understand what will be expected. But also be really clear, actually, we really can't go ahead unless the whole organisation wants to do this, and a kind of a level of assertiveness and clarity in making that position is really essential, isn't it?
Absolutely. I say they can add enormous value, they can make a huge difference. But if you're not, if you're not set up, then you will spend hours of your time, hours of your colleagues' time managing the endless questions and the mess and the frustration that will come from it. So it's absolutely worth investing in that early stage to make sure that you have the right foundation in place.
Yeah, and I guess some of the stick, carrot and stick, the stick part of this is if you sense that your senior team really aren't getting this. The bottom line is, unless we get these 4, you might have all of the hassle, but not get those rich returns.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and I've seen examples of that where, boards haven't been managed in the right way. They are huge time suckers, because these people are demanding. You can spend enormous amounts of time trying to kind of build bridges to kind of make up for lost ground. But if you don't have those things in place, then you're always onto a loser. And they're very hard to shut down. You then run the risk of damaging reputation, because just as you can use a volunteer to positively influence a network, just as easy for them to negatively influence a network. So what you don't want is annoyed volunteers who are going off and bad-mouthing the organisation for not having given them the respect that they think they deserve.
So this tactic has rich rewards, but really only for an organisation and a senior team that go into it with their eyes open and are really serious about doing what is necessary to make it work for all parties.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. And then I had a question about how you go about setting, assuming you've decided it is right for us, how do you find the board members and B, the chair, or in which order do you do it? Help me out with that one.
So I think once you've decided you're going ahead, you've got you're kind of clear that you've got a good foundation in place. You then need to be clear about what it is you're expecting the board to deliver. So, hopefully you've got a clear sense of the remit from in terms of the mission that they're delivering. What financial target are you setting? And obviously, as you referenced earlier, some charities that might be millions, for some it might just be, tens of thousands. So depending on what scale you're talking about. And what areas are you hoping to access? So are you able to deal with a major giving program if your volunteers start, securing major gifts? Have you got a corporate team or a ability to develop corporate? So think about the kinds of people that you want to engage, and also the kinds of people that you already have contact with. So obviously, as with all fundraising, you look at your kind of nearest and dearest first. So if you already have some major donors, are there any of those that have shown potential or interest in getting more involved with the organisation? Are there a couple of trustees maybe who've shown a particular interest in fundraising and have introduced contacts before? So in most cases, there will be somebody, at least one person within your network of supporters who has the potential to kind of help you get this board going and growing.
And that person may or may not be your vision for who would be the good chair in the end of it.
Yeah.
You're saying find someone who could help you kind of get it going and to start getting people in a room.
Yeah. So, for example, here at the Children's Museum, we are in the process of setting up a campaign board and identified a couple of people who had already supported and had been involved, neither of whom were chair potentials, but were both passionate about helping us deliver the income we need for the campaign. And we kind of proposed to them a set of kind of job descriptions, essentially. So what we were looking for in terms of a chair and what we were looking for in terms of board members. And given the scale of the campaign, we're obviously looking for somebody who is kind of has a good profile, is very senior, can access gifts at £1 million plus level. So we're quite we've got quite specific requirements, I guess, in terms of what we're looking for. And as kind of passionate, as committed as the couple of volunteers are, neither of them quite fit that description in terms of profile and leverage networks. So we shared that description with them. They could kind of clearly see for themselves that they didn't fit that description either. So I know sometimes people worry that that's a problem, that people will...
Did that help you in that communication with them, that you'd already written down on a piece of paper the right chair to achieve what we need to achieve for the Children's Museum? We'll have these... There are these 3 or 4 things that are musts on our list. Yeah. You could show them that, and then it wasn't personal.
Absolutely.
They could opt out.
Exactly. So they essentially self-selected. They kind of, said to me, rather than me having to say to them, I don't think I can fit the bill, but I want to help you find them. Yeah. So we've worked with those 2 people to start with, have then grown that to 6 people now. Again, none of whom are going to be the chair, but who are all working with us to secure that chair. So for us, it came from those couple of people. I think if you're really stuck, if you can't think of even one person within your network, or you're really struggling to get them engaged, then you can also go down the recruitment route. So I know a number of charities who've successfully worked with headhunters to identify someone external to their networks, but who's looking for a charity role. So again, if you've got a really clear description of what it is that you're looking for, essentially a job description, the person's specification, there are people out there who will, sometimes pro bono, sometimes for a fee, will help you identify that person. So, think about the sorts of professionals who are looking for a portfolio career, who are maybe taking a number of non-exec positions. Quite often they will now say, I would also like a charity role to be part of my portfolio. So there is always that route. So even if you're sitting there thinking, I just can't think of anyone, we're starting from a position of a blank sheet of paper, then don't rule this method out, because you could still look for somebody new from outside the organisation.
Yeah, and it's especially tantalising to me that potentially that headhunter might do that as a pro bono thing. There must be recruiters and headhunters out there, and most people I know some people in recruitment. One could start by calling the first 4 people who've been recruiters who've been sending you emails. Absolutely. So that's a really good tactic that need not cost you if you really don't already have the networks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you've alluded to them, and they might shift a little bit depending on the organisation and the campaign. But if you were to go for a default 2 or 3 qualities that are likely to be found in a successful chair of a volunteer board, what might those 2 or 3 be on the top of your list?
So I think the first one has to be that they are influential in their network. So again, the scale and scope of that network will vary depending on what you're trying to achieve. But they need to be someone who is perceived by their peers as being someone of influence, someone who they would take a phone call from, that they would be willing to come to an event for. So the person who is leading your board has to be the most influential person, has to be able to pull those strings. So that will kind of automatically weed out some people who might be able to be a board member. So they might still have all the other qualities, but if they don't have that key thing of being the most influential, the kind of person who can sit head of the table, then that would rule them out. If they have that, they also need to be willing to use that network. So there are some people in some industries who might be very well connected, but where they are not, they're not the client. They have client relationships. So just because somebody has a great black book,
because for instance they're a supplier,
yes,
they've got an amazing little black book, but they'd be in a conflict of interest to be going out and telling people what to do or making too many asks. If it just would be bad for their business.
Exactly. So they have to have the networks, but they also have to be willing to leverage those networks for you.
Right.
And there might be some people who it wouldn't even be a conflict of interest, but they just don't, from a character perspective, they don't feel comfortable with it, and there's nothing you can do to kind of unlock that unease that they have.
And the reality is, some people are comfortable and some are not. You've got to get clear about that from the start, rather than rue it later because we didn't quite bring it up.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what else?
They also need to be willing to give. So again, if you're looking at this person as the lead of your campaign, they're the person that's leading the charge, they need to also do that with the support that they bring. So if they are tasking their board, and then the board are going out to their networks, asking for gifts in whatever format that might take, if they haven't been willing to make that investment themselves, that whole chain kind of collapses. And there are a whole range of ways they can do that. It might be a gift through their company, it might be a gift through a trust, it could be gifts over time. It doesn't, although ideally you want that to be the lead gift, so you'd like them to give the biggest gift of the board. It doesn't have to be the case if maybe there are other things that they're bringing. But I do think the principle of giving personally is incredibly important.
And again, must they have actually signed the cheque, or the company started to do the giving before you appoint them as chair, or are you a bit more relaxed about?
I think, a bit more.
We might never get going at all.
Yes, exactly. I think they have to have signed up to the principle of it.
Yeah.
And
you believe that they're
yes, absolutely. So again, thinking about the campaign board that I'm starting here. So we're starting from that, from that position of starting position. we were very clear from the beginning that each of the, that one of the requirements, not just for the chair, but for all of the members, was to give. We've been working with them to set up, various things in terms of our approach and our prospect list. And it's only now, maybe 6 months after we had kind of set that requirement, that I'm now having conversations with each of them about, okay, so that's one of the deal. Have you thought about it? What level are you thinking? How can we now make that gift a reality? And there's, everyone that I've spoken to is kind of gone, oh yes, I know that's something I need to do. I've been thinking about it. Let's have a further conversation. So I think as long as you're very clear from the beginning, and everyone knows the deal, that conversation is then quite easy. So as long as they've signed up to the terms of reference, that it should then follow.
Yeah. Are we there? That's your two or three. Anything else? I think need to be careful of, to look out for.
So I think they need to be passionate advocates for your cause. So there are lots of people who would be great volunteers who've got the networks who are willing to support, but they have to be able to influence their networks. And if they're not bought into what your organisation is doing, if they're cynical or critical, or maybe they don't necessarily agree with your approach, again, you're always going to come up against that, because yes, in theory they'll ask their friends, but actually no, they won't, because they're not happy yet. Right? Yeah.
But you're not saying they need, at the time you approach them, they need to have been a lifelong fan.
No.
I mean, they might be.
Yeah.
That's all yeah. But they might have these other qualities and be willing to explore and become really interested and passionate about this particular thing. But really, it's the other way around. You're saying is, if you sense they're not, if you sense some problem or conflict between them and their willingness to get behind you, that should be a warning to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
It kind of sounds obvious in a way when we say it like this, but we could be seduced by
exactly
the other things, couldn't we?
Absolutely. And again, you'd just be setting yourself up for trouble if you don't address it. So as you said before, there are lots of other things that you can layer onto it, and depending on your charity, you might want to build extra things into your terms of reference around number of meetings they come to per year, and how they might address their prospecting or whatever. But those are the things that I think are essential. So the ability to lead, the ability to leverage networks, the willingness to give, and the passion for your organisation.
Excellent. And then similar to that, but not quite the same, is in terms of what you say to the new board members from the start. Again, I know things have gone wrong sometimes with this strategy where organisations weren't clear enough. Do you go so far as to say that there should be a contract people even sign when they become a board member? Or is it, and there's a spectrum here of just how formal do you make it, but how have you tended to make it work in terms of showing board members clearly what this is and what it is not about?
The minimum I would always do is have a written terms of reference.
And it might just be a couple of pages?
1 page. It shouldn't be more than a page.
Yeah.
On that, you should have what you expect the board member to do. So, the things that we've just talked about, or whatever else you want to include. But it should also have what they can expect from you as an organisation. So who is their main point of contact? What kind of support can they expect to give? So that it's a kind of mutual arrangement. It's not just we as an organisation are demanding of you. It's also this is what you can expect. And so at the minimum, I would have that as a printed document that they keep, that is is referred to. I think in an ideal world, if your chair is really kind of bought in and is happy to do that, then to actually get people to sign up to that physically, I think is a great thing. Again, one of the chairs that I worked with at the NSPCC was really keen on that. He took over chairing a board that had previously been operating and had terms of reference, but in a slightly looser, had them kind of written down but not signed up to. And he used the opportunity of starting as a chair to say, right, going to clear the decks, make sure everything's clear. This is an opportunity to refresh. And he wrote to every board member and said, your support that you've given to date has been fantastic. Just to remind you, these are the things that you have to agree to as a board member. He actually included in his letter the reference to the fact that it was a real privilege to sit on the board. So he was really kind of a real advocate for, if you to be able to go out to your networks and your friends and say, I am a member of a board for the NSPCC. That's a big deal. People put that in their CVs. You see, I often see, on people's professional profiles, the boards that they belong to for an organisation. So he was very clear about saying, this is a privilege for you. There is an expectation of what you will deliver.
Yes.
I really hope that you can continue to deliver that. If so, please sign this and send it back to me. Right. If not, there are there are lots of other ways that you can support the organisation. And I think that's something to really be mindful of, is that You should never feel that you're stuck. It's never an either or. It's not either they're a board member or they're not a supporter. There are a whole other range of ways that they can get involved.
Yeah, that's ever so important, isn't it? Because this way of working, this way of supporting a charity is not for everybody. It doesn't make them a bad person. It's just for whatever reason to do with whether they like meetings, whether they like following things up, whether they've got time or money. They may or may not be right for supporting your cause in this way.
Yeah.
Moving away from this either or can really free you up and hopefully help you have a robust discussion. And that could be good for both parties if currently you've got a board member or even a chair and it's not working.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is to remember that might change over time. So you might recruit the best board member in the world and they might do fantastic things for you for 2 years and be brilliant, but then they might change their job, or they might have a family, or they might move, and suddenly they're not able to fulfil the requirements that they did before. And actually that's fine. That's okay. It's okay for them to step down. It's okay for them to continue supporting in a different way. And I think if you have that clear terms of reference that you can refer them back to and say, I know how committed you are to the charity, but you're not able to fulfil these requirements. And as you said, Rob, that's fine. That's okay. Yeah. Here are some other things you might want to think of. Because actually, I think, again, I've worked with so many volunteers where they are really committed. They really, really want to make a difference for your charity, but for whatever reason, they're unable to. And they feel guilty.
That makes them feel bad, as well as causing you
exactly.
stress about the symptoms of. Yeah.
And giving and supporting should be a joyful experience. We talk about the joy of giving, but actually if they're sitting there thinking, oh, I really want to help, but I feel like I'm letting them down, I haven't been able to go to the last 2 meetings, I'm letting the beneficiaries down, that's not a good feeling. And in the long run, that's going to damage their relationship. So much better to be transparent and open, address the issue sooner rather than later. And if it's the case that they want to take a sabbatical, great. If it's a case of moving them to a different role, absolutely fine.
I think this is one of the key learnings that I found in this way of working, and from the advice you're giving us today is if the listener already has a board and there's some things about it aren't working, or the chair or some of the members is not working, key thing you're saying is don't just suffer it. Mm-hmm. It's bad for both parties. Get proactive, work out a strategy, either you on your own or you with your manager or even your chief exec or someone, and go and have this sensible chat where you end up with win-win for both parties, even if that means you might lose a board member. Mm-hmm. Better to lose them and get a decent board.
Absolutely. And I think that the really important thing to remember is that in all likelihood this person is incredibly committed to your charity. They're passionate about what you're trying to achieve. They didn't volunteer to just be annoying and to cause problems. They want to make a difference. So as a fundraiser, you're on the receiving end potentially of some challenging issues, challenging behaviour. If you think about it from their perspective, actually they want to make a difference to your charity. How can you help them to do that? Yeah. If you always kind of come back to thinking about it from that point of view, that might kind of unlock the issue, and you might realise actually it is because they're too busy, or it is because they've got a conflict, or they've got commitments elsewhere. How can you make that easier for them?
So I hope you found this excerpt from my interview with Jennifer helpful. For a short summary of the key ideas, do check out the episode notes on the blog and podcast section of our Bright Spot Fundraising website. As you may know, I tried to keep these podcast episodes under half an hour, but if you're a member of the Bright Spot Members Club, you'll be able to access the full interview in the club online. This includes Jennifer's tactics to help boards increase income by embracing the notion of major donor fundraising, rather than defaulting to the glitzy gala dinners that they're often drawn to, but which you may be aware are very time intensive and tend to have a much lower return on investment compared to major donor fundraising. And if you're not yet a member of the Bright Spot Members Club, it's well worth checking out, as there are lots of resources in the club to help your fundraising, including a great session we recorded from when members wanted to get advice from Jennifer on a range of topics, including some of the ideas we talked about in today's interview. So if you're curious about how the club gives ongoing support and inspiration as an alternative to one-off conference days, you can find out more by checking out the website brightspotmembersclub.com/join. Finally, thank you so much for listening today. Over the last 2 decades, whenever I've interviewed super successful fundraisers like Jennifer, I've noticed that one thing they all have in common is a willingness to keep learning throughout their career. But I also know this isn't always easy, so thank you for being one of the ones who do. So until the next time, best of luck with your fundraising.